I'm Dr. Mike Dodds. I'm the director of CU Press here at Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. And I'm having a conversation today with Dr. Tommy Ice. This is part 2 that we began last week with the subject of eschatology, God's prophetic timetable and world events. Follow along now as we continue that discussion of what we're seeing around the world and is there any significance in light of God's prophetic timetable?
I believe if people interpret the Bible in its context, literal interpretation is what I was talking about earlier and forgot.
Right.
That simply means according to the letter. Literal means according to the letter, what is written, as opposed to allegorical, which means you bring in ideas from outside the context and put them in. Like, here's the word Israel, and you read the church in. See, that is allegorical or non-literal interpretation. And so literal doesn't mean literalistic, but it means according to what the text says in its context, as I know you know. But
no, it's probably to clarify a figurative passage. Jesus says, I am the gate.
Yes.
In John 10,
well,
he's using an image there.
Yeah, but in the context, that passage is taken literally because that's what he intends. He's using the illustration, of he's the great shepherd and all of these other types of things. And in a literal interpretation would understand figures of speech and metaphors.
And that might be one of the biggest issues for people as they look at prophetic scripture. What is the correct understanding of the passage hermeneutically, proper exegesis? Your book touches on Israel. People look at Israel today and say it's not faithful. Well, we look at the nation, and it's, though we have a new prime minister that wears the kippah a little bit more than the other, Israel is still a focus of God's heart.
Right, because the purpose of the tribulation, the 70th week, is going to lead at the end of Israel being converted. So if Israel...
The nation of Israel.
Yes, I'll explain this. In other words, if Israel as a nation is required, which it is, for the second coming to occur, according to the end of Matthew 23, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The condition for Christ to come and rescue the nation of Israel is that they have to believe and call on his name. And you see that in Romans 11. He says, behold, I tell you a mystery. There is a new revelation. And so the point is that the tribulation is where God's going to purge out the rebel. We see this in Ezekiel 20, Ezekiel 22. And during that 7-year period, 2/3, as Zechariah says, of Jewish people will be purged out. So that by the time you get to the end of the tribulation, and I think throughout the tribulation, Jewish people will start accepting Jesus as Messiah. And so by the time you get to the end, I believe every Jewish person who's left will have accepted Jesus as Messiah, and they will call on him. He'll come, and the second coming is a rescue event to rescue Israel. Otherwise, she'd be wiped out, it says, because all the nations of the world gather at Armageddon and come to attack Israel. And I even believe there are passages in Isaiah and other places that talk about how from that point on, every Jewish person on into the millennium will be a believer. God makes it up. It says the lean years in the end. And so this is being unfolded in history, we believe, in the near future, very likely, because it's been 2,000 years. I mean, come on.
So, but they're not there yet. And
no,
there's
they're not.
The tension.
So in order to convert the nation, they have to be a nation for this to happen. So they're obviously being regathered in unbelief.
Paul's comment in Romans 11, then you feel, if I understand your conclusion, that all Israel will be saved. There's that focal point on Israel coming in God's eye, or it's always been, but even more so in the tribulation period. Is the world also a part of the focus in the tribulation then?
Well, of course it is.
How so?
Well, Revelation 3:10 says that you'll be kept from that hour which is about to come on the whole world to test those who dwell upon the earth. So the purpose of the tribulation, another purpose, is to test the earth dwellers. I have an article in BibSac that shows the 11 uses of the phrase earth dweller in the book of Revelation. And the first one there is Revelation 3:10, I just quoted. And then you have 10 other uses, and you have pauses in the book of Revelation where it refers to the earth dwellers. And when you get to the last two uses, it says that it talks about the judgment coming on the earth dwellers because their names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. In other words, they're not elect. And if you take those passages, not a single earth dweller ever becomes a believer during the tribulation. So that is a term that describes the unbelievers. And so if the purpose is to test them, is God puts them through severe tests, extreme tests, and no matter what happens, he's demonstrating that an unbeliever is an unbeliever is an unbeliever. And, it takes the grace of God for one to become a believer.
Let's clarify what you're saying here. There are some that I've heard say no one is saved in the tribulation. Now, but you were just arguing that at least Jews are going to be saved. Are Gentiles? Now, we're thinking of people that we know that they don't know Christ. And if Christ were to come back today, they'd be moving into the tribulation as unbelievers. Is there a potential for them to be saved?
Well, certainly. In fact, Revelation 7, the second half of the chapter, talks about that. It says,
Gentiles, you're talking about.
Yes, it says, it uses a phrase 7 times in the book of Revelation, from every tribe, kindred, tongue, or nation. And that is a denomination that denotes the smallest people group. And so there's going to be believers from all around the world. It says a number too great to be counted. And that's talking about believers from the tribulation period. And those are Gentiles that's talking about, because you have other descriptions talking about Jewish converts during the tribulation and stuff. So later it talks about a 200 million man army. So I take it that a number too great is even more than over 200 million. So there's going to be hundreds of millions of Gentiles saved during the tribulation after the rapture. And I've never bought this wrong interpretation from 2 Thessalonians 2 that says if you heard the gospel before the rapture and you rejected it, then you can't get saved. And that is, I've got 2 or 3 articles, on my website rebutting that.
That address that specifically.
Yeah, it's talking about what they do is they assume that it's unbelief during the church age that impacts you during the tribulation. Well, sorry, but the context and the grammar and syntax of the passage is that it's during the tribulation that people have unbelief. It's not referring to the church age, you see, but that's especially in Baptist circles, I heard that a lot over the last 50 years.
The impetus to evangelism now.
Right, you better do it now. And I agree, today's the day, you need to trust Christ now. But I wouldn't use misinterpretations of Scripture to try to motivate people to do that.
Never. All right, you've got many articles and a lot of questions that we've engendered for me and others as they're perhaps listening in today. I've referenced this one book here on Zionism.
Let me make one other point about that book.
Case for Zionism.
My overwhelmingly longest chapter is the last chapter. And it's a history of what the church has believed about Israel. And of course, the first 1,500 years is pretty short because anti-Semitism came in and there was a hatred for Israel and all of this. But the Reformation began to change things. And the Lutheran wing under Luther was bad, but basically in the late 1500s, you begin to have a change. And for example, the United States, the Puritans were very much pro-Israel. And so America had a different type of Christianity than European Christianity with its heritage of anti-Semitism. And we produced filio-Semitism. And this is why even today, most Americans are pro-Israel, and whether they're Christians or not, because of that overflow. And it's beginning to change. They've just done surveys with the 18 to 25-year-olds, and they're only 50-50, which is a huge shift away from Israel. And that's because, we haven't had a revival. These people are not believers. They're getting into Antifa and all these crazy things, like that, instead of being busy with the latest revival or evangelism project.
Right. I also wonder, having been a pastor for years, that it's also the neglect of teaching it. For a number of reasons, people avoid prophetic themes. Partly the pressure from the culture, tell me how to live today, type thing. But we need to refresh our thinking. You've got many articles on the website. You've also got books at pre-trib.org/store is where they can find books. You've got some other books. I've got another representative here, Ed Heinzen and Tommy Ice, Charting the Bible Chronologically. If you could recommend yours, maybe others' books that you think are real good for somebody just starting at a basic level, help me to put the big picture together.
Yeah, I would recommend a similar book to that one, but one that Tim LaHaye and I did 21 years ago.
All right, so Tim LaHaye and Tommy Ice.
Yeah.
And what's the title of that?
Charting the End Times.
Charting the End Times as opposed to...
And that has 50 charts and chapters explaining the basics of Bible prophecy in it. And, I'd recommend that.
Okay. What about a mid-level? Somebody, yes, I already understand the basics. Help me understand what might be next, but still at a basic.
I don't know, but another one I'd recommend that's more extensive is Things to Come by Dwight Pentecost.
Okay.
That's a very extensive.
Now that's a little older book, but yet you're saying his exegesis, and that's what we're talking about, Scripture.
The interpretation of Scripture hasn't changed.
Okay.
And things.
A book on a real deep level. Somebody really wants to go.
Well, that's the one I would recommend. I'm not sure about the intermediate thing.
All right. Your books would be available not only on your website, but where else?
Amazon.
Anywhere, any place that good books are sold.
Those kind of places.
Okay, you're distributing widely there. How can our listeners contact you? They maybe have a question, or maybe somebody would want to call Tommy and say, hey, come on over and do a conference with us or join our conference.
Well, the best thing is the email.
And could they do that through your website?
Well, probably. I'm not sure. I think my email's on there. But it's simple. It's simply ICE-T, my last name.
ICE.
And the letter T. I used to be a drink, but now I'm a rapper. ICE-T.
Yes.
At pre-trib.org.
ICE-T at
-trib.org.
Cool. All right. So they can get in contact with you.
They can email me. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Email you there and get some information. Any final thoughts? We've sort of ranged wide, and I've asked some specific questions. Any words of encouragement for students of prophecy? Something that you are just aware of that's going on out there, you either want to caution about or you want to encourage about?
Well, the New Testament emphasizes as believers that we're waiting for his Son from heaven. And it says that 6 or 7, 8 times, and we're not watching because there's nothing to watch for. All of those watch passages relate to the tribulation, to people in the tribulation as they see things developing. But the term waiting, even in Titus 2:13, where it says looking, that is actually the Greek word for waiting. And some newer translations have updated that to waiting, which is what it should be, waiting for his Son from heaven. And so there's nothing to look for in current events, even though we see, as we used the illustration earlier, preparation for what's going to happen after the rapture. And so obviously we're getting near.
So what should we be about? It
says we should be about evangelism and discipleship.
Is talking about prophetic themes an appropriate evangelistic tool?
Yes.
I'm sort of singing to the choir here, but yes.
Well, yes. In fact, that often is a way to engage people, is to talk about what's going on in the world.
Are you finding unbelievers asking the questions? Or are you hearing people saying, wow, what's going wrong with the world? I assume they are, but
there was, it's been a year now since 911. There was initially, but I think that's fading even now. The concern about 911, I'm sorry, not 911, but
the COVID
thing, yes, in the last year.
One of those pestilences type thing.
Yeah, I think there was some initial interest spiritually in things, but you're still seeing an overall decline, in people going to church, and there's been a tremendous decline in all of that and stuff. And I could go off for an hour.
And you said there's also a demonstrated decline in a younger generation's interest in prophetic themes.
Well, in Christianity, period, over and out. They're just not interested.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And prophecy as well. People always, what can I do to get young people? Well, when I was young, in the 70s, prophecy conference was, and it was all the young people. Now prophecy conferences are all the old people.
Wow. But we're even closer.
Yes.
And should be even more of not a distraction. I'm using the word distraction, that I spend all my time just trying to figure out prophetically where we are on the timeline, or what details being fulfilled.
And once again, you can't figure that out.
Right. That's a distraction.
But having said that, probably my third or fourth time now, Israel's back in the land, and that's you can build a scenario of what is going to happen during the tribulation, and you see the stage being set for that.
Cool. Well, Tommy,
you just don't know when the curtain's going to go up.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We've filled a whole hour here.
Or they say in the military when the balloon's going to go up.
Right. And that means it's the big one type thing. Well, thank you, Tommy, for joining us for this conversation, and thank our listeners for joining us for Calvary Conversations.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.